Hi, everyone. I'm Jen Lucas, managing editor of the Knitting Circle, and I want to welcome you to this month's live Q&A event. Each month, we just take a little bit of time to answer your questions with a knitting expert and just talk about the subject we love so much, which is knitting and yarn. So before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that we have a free pattern for you to download this month. And this month, we have the Chunky Broken Rib Cowl, which I have right here. So you will find a link to this pattern wherever you're watching it. Just look for the link that says Chunky Broken Rib Cowl, and you can download this pattern to knit one for yourself. In addition to that, you're going to want to make sure that you're checking out the chat box again, whether you're watching this on Facebook, YouTube, our website, wherever, and make sure to say hello and leave all your questions for us down in the chat box, and we'll try to get through as many as we can over the next hour. So this month we have Michele Lee Bernstein with us. Michele is an amazing knitwear designer. She designs the coolest things. She's also a soon-to-be book author, and she also is an amazing instructor. She's an instructor on the Knitting Circle website, and she also teaches in person and online. So I'm so excited to have her with us today. So welcome, Michele. Nice to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here with you. It's always nice to chat with you.
Yeah, I love chatting with you too. So while everybody is sort of getting settled, saying hello in the chat and starting to ask their questions, why don't you just quickly tell us a little bit about yourself and your knitting journey?
Well, I've been knitting since I was 14. My favorite aunt taught me how to knit. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love knitting those accessories too. That's the main thing I like to knit as well. Well, while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I already see a couple, but we're going to wait for a few more to come in. I think we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to take a look at some of the projects that have been submitted on our photo gallery for the Knitting Circle website. And if you don't know about our photo gallery, if you go to our Knitting Circle website and click on articles, you'll see something that's called Project Gallery. And if you like, you can actually upload a photo of your project to our website and tell us a little bit about it. We occasionally feature them on social media, and we're going to talk about some of them here today. So I think the first one we were going to talk about is from Teresa J, and it's a blue and white checked hat. And now Teresa had noted that she was frustrated at trying to get the stranded color work loose enough. And so, Michele, I know that you love color work, so I thought maybe you would have some tips or suggestions for Teresa on working stranded color work.
yes, I do. And I do teach a class in stranded color work. And see, these are some of the tips that I give. So when you're knitting your stranded color work, every time you're going to change your color, not if you're only doing one stitch and then the other color, one stitch, one stitch, one stitch, but if you've got a couple stitches, and I see that you've got a 2x2 check on this hat, after you finish with one color and you're going to start the next one, go ahead and put your needle into the stitch. But before you make the stitch, spread out your stitches on your right needle, and that will make sure that the strand that's coming behind is long enough that it's not going to pull things tight. And so you'll knit your 2 stitches, and then you put your needle into the stitch for the first color again, spread your stitches out on that right needle, and then make your stitch. If you spread your stitches out first and then stick your needle in and you pull your yarn, it's not going to give it that space. So set your needle point first and then spread your stitches out and go around. Another thing you can do, if you're knitting in the round like you are in this hat, you can turn your knitting inside out so that the stranding is on the outside and you're working kind of across the circle from yourself. So you're still working on the front of the knitting, but it's just further away from you. And then the strands are on the outside, and that means they have to travel a little bit further, and that gives you a little bit more give, as opposed to being on the inside and being able to kind of scrunch things. So those are my 2 favorite tips for stranded color work.
Yeah, that's really great. That's really interesting. I never actually thought about the turning it inside out, but still working from the right side, just working sort of from like the other side almost of your knitting. That's really interesting. That's a great tip. And if anybody wants to know a little bit more about color work, Michele actually does have some really great color work videos on the Knitting Circle website. So you should go ahead and look for those. Okay, so that was great. So let's look at another color work project. This one's from Jack and Knit. It's a brick stitch dishcloth, and I believe that slip stitch knitting was used on this one. There we go. So do you have any tips for slip stitch knitting, or any suggestions, or what you like about it versus color work, or stranded color work, etc.?
So slip stitch knitting, and sometimes it's called mosaic knitting, depending on what kind of pattern it is another kind of color work knitting. But the cool thing about it is that you only use one color per row. And so you're using that light color there on this brick stitch, and then you slip the stitch, the one that's going to be that elongated stitch. You don't knit it, you just slip it across and you continue. And then when you work it later, it's going to pull up. So you don't have to carry two colors at the same time. There's not that, oh, am I making my floats long enough? Because there really aren't that kind of floats. I have a shawl behind me that uses stranded color work too. It's called Half the Knit Sky. And all of those long stripes, the long white stripes of star trails, that's slip stitch knitting. And I love color work knitting where I'm only holding one color at a time. Brioche is another way you can use two different colors, but you're only using one color at a time.
Yeah, I agree. I love slip stitch knitting. I love this dishcloth pattern. There's several different versions of this pattern online. I think the most common one is called the ball band dishcloth. And so if you're interested, for anybody that's watching, if you go online and just search for ball band dishcloth, you'll find it. It's a free pattern that you can find online, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
So
just try it and
yeah.
take some scrap yarn, and it's kind of like magic.
Yeah, and I am fairly certain that this particular dishcloth pattern, I'm almost certain it was my first time ever doing slip stitch knitting. So
Me too.
yeah, so it proves this particular pattern. It's very good for beginners or people new to slip stitch knitting. I really do like that one. Well, let's go ahead and keep it with the color work. I think the next one we wanted to look at was from Rhonda C., and it's called the Safe at Home Blanket. And she submitted this on our website. This pattern is available, I believe, online. So if you search for, Safe at Home Blanket, you can find it. And this is definitely some complicated color work. What do you think, Michele?
It's simple and it's complicated. Mm-hmm. And it definitely has intarsia going on, which is where you are making blocks of color. So I don't know if you've ever seen where they say, make sure you twist your yarns around each other so that you don't have a hole. You don't do that in stranded color work, and you don't do that in mosaic knitting or slip stitch knitting. But when you're doing intarsia and you've got those blocks, you see the front doors and the windows on there, you definitely have to twist your two yarns around each other, or you'll have individual blocks of knitting with space between them, and we don't want the space. But I love the way you can use scrap yarns on this blanket. You can also buy yarn to make it in these exact colors, but you could also use up your scraps. And there's some interesting things going on the top of the house where you've got the roof. I think there is some decreasing to make that point. And then I think, because I looked at the pattern a couple days ago, but on the side of the roof where you've got the sky, there is a sideways triangle that is the coolest thing. And if you're not sure you want to make an entire blanket, again, take some scraps, try it out, get the pattern, try it out. If nothing else, you could make a pillow with maybe some, but not that many squares, or you could make a pincushion with two little houses, one front, one back, or if you really can't stand it, one on the front and garter stitch on the back, and that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, but
I love the pattern. It's beautiful.
Yeah, that is a beautiful pattern, and that is a beautiful blanket that Rhonda made. It is really, really stunning. So, yeah, if you're up for a challenge, that one might be good for you. Have you knit a lot of intarsia projects, Michele?
I have not. Intarsia is not my favorite way of doing color work because, I like one at a time, really. I'll do stranded color work, but my favorite is brioche or slip stitch.
Yeah. Same. I have done things with a little bit of intarsia in it. I actually do have I have a lot of sweaters just sort of stuffed in the closet back there that I've started over the years. I'm really good at starting sweaters and never finishing them, but I do actually have a sweater that I started in. I can't remember the name of the pattern, but it was in a creative knitting magazine. And the fronts have these diagonal stripes that you have to do in intarsia. But, you know, it's like I got one side done and then couldn't quite motivate myself to do the
And
second side of intarsia.
the intarsia where you've got straight lines where you like on the doorways and the windows, that's not hard actually.
Mhm.
It's pretty self-explanatory and you know what to do when you get there. And diagonals are slightly more challenging, but not awful. I knit when my kids were little. You remember the Vogue Grumpy Cat sweater? It was a
Yeah.
child sweater, had a big cat face on it, and it was
Hmm.
grumpy. I knit one for each of my kids. For the younger kid at the time, the cat scared him, so he had to have a smiley cat sweater.
Oh,
And I had the yarn to make one for me too. And by the time I got to the third sweater, I was done. It went into a box under the bed, and it's probably still under there 20 years later.
yeah.
Let me talk about one other kind of color work knitting that you might not
Mhm.
think of as color work. But you know, stripes are the easiest color work because you're only
Yeah.
using one color and you work it and then you change and you make your next color stripe. So that is another way you can do color work knitting. And I'm actually sitting here, I've got a log cabin wrap, and
Ooh.
it's stripes, right?
Mhm.
So I'm only using one color at a time. The reason I'm working on it, this I did in the spring, and I wanted to see how far the yarn would go. So it is 98 inches wide, and I never wear it because it's way too big for me. So
Mhm.
I've ripped off a whole bunch of the ends, and when I'm done, it'll be about 72 inches wide, which is about right for a 5 foot tall person. It's
Mhm.
got enough to wrap, but it's not like I'm wrapping and wrapping.
Yeah. Love that. Let's see. We do have a question from Esther, which I don't think we have a photo. She wanted to see about the wrong side of the safe at home blanket. I don't think we have a picture of that on our website, but if you do search for the safe at home blanket online, you may be able to find it. If you are a Ravelry user and you go to the safe at home blanket page and see other people's projects, you probably could see the wrong side. And she had noticed that noted, I would think you would have to line the blanket to cover up all the ends on the back.
Well, it depends. If you are careful about sewing in your ends, you don't actually have to line the blanket.
Hmm.
And intarsia is really pretty clean looking on the back. It's not like stranded color work where you've got all those strands going across,
Hmm.
which is an interesting pattern in itself.
Right.
But for intarsia, everything is still those blocks, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's tidy.
Yeah, I guess I kind of think about it because I also like to do counted cross stitch. So it's almost like counted cross stitch in a way that if you do it neatly, your back kind of looks like the front, you know?
Yes.
Well, not always. Mine's usually like, but if you do it
You're going to
neatly, the
frame it.
back
No one's
looks
going to know.
similar. Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, great. And then let's see if there's oh, we were gonna take a look at the Hexagon socks from Vicky B. And I just wanted to look at these because I thought they were so cool. And this particular pattern is from the Think Outside the Socks book. I'm pretty sure I had looked it up online. I'm pretty sure that that's where that pattern came from. I'm not sure if that book is still available, but you could, of course, Google it if you like the socks. But here's another great use of color. What a cool looking sock.
So are those hexagons modular? Do you do one
I
hexagon and then do the next one?
I think so. Let's see. Um,
I love them. I wonder what the heel is like too. I want more pictures.
yeah. Yeah, I can't really tell. It does look, there is one picture online that I'm seeing. And again, if you Google it and if you are a Ravelry user, you can find it there on Ravelry. It does look like maybe they are modular and somehow seam together. You're picking up, because it almost looks to me like they're worked from the center out, each hexagon, maybe?
Oh, that's
Possibly.
brilliant. Who's the designer? Can you tell?
The designer is Kirsten Hall.
Because that is a brilliant mind. I think in straight lines when I design mostly.
Yeah, me too.
Or, what will end up being a half circle, but when you're knitting, it's really just straight lines.
Mhm.
And so to begin at the center of something and be able to think your way into the shapes of what is going to happen is amazing. Again, this piece that I'm redoing, that started in the center, but it's a square. I can think in squares and straight lines, and then the straight lines went on the ends of it. So that hexagon thing is amazing.
Yeah, it looks like it's either started from the center out or the out in, either way, but it looks like individual hexagons. And here we can see with the one that was on our project gallery page from Vicky that looks like something that maybe she had used like leftover sock yarn to make, which I don't know about you, Michele. Designing a lot of shawls, at least for a long time, I was designing a lot of shawls in sock weight, fingering weight yarn. I have like a lot of sock yarn leftovers. So I feel like this, same.
This is what I ripped off the end of my wrap.
Yeah. I just have, there's like balls of leftover sock yarn everywhere in this house.
But not from socks, right? You don't knit socks?
I do knit socks too, but most of the leftover sock yarn is from shawl knitting for the most part.
I completely understand.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I don't think we have any questions about anything we looked at. Oh, there was one other one we wanted to look at that was not necessarily color work, but we just thought was cool. And it was from Hope K. And it was a Bedrunner. And she was actually inspired. There we go. It was inspired by an Aran sweater that Hope had made. And they used some stitches from the sweater and some other designs to make the Bedrunner. So talk about just taking something from a pattern you love and making it your own, right?
Yes, I think she did a great job. And I love how it's balanced. So if she took that center section and then there was something going up the side, but I think she added some other stitches to it too, which makes it really interesting and really her own. And I love how soothing it is to knit with just one color sometimes. And that is so beautiful.
Yeah, I think that is so beautiful. I love those cables. Just that whole thing is just really cool. And that is part of what I just love about knitting, is that if you do find something like a sweater pattern that you really like and you like the stitch pattern on it, use it again for something else. I know for me as a designer, sometimes there is sort of this pressure to like always be using new stitch patterns, but the longer I design, I do find myself occasionally going back to stitch patterns that I really, really, really love and using them again in another way, for sure.
I do that too. If there's something that works for you and you can make it fresh, go ahead and do it.
Right, exactly. Right. It's your knitting needs to make you happy, right? That's the main thing.
And sometimes what you want is just a meditative knit where you're not trying to learn a new thing every time you pick up your needles. Sometimes you just want the Zen flow.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I think let's go ahead and take maybe one look at maybe one more, and then we can get to some of these questions we have in the chat. We were going to look at a hat from Leslie L. And she made this hat for the Hats Not Hate charity, which is a charity that Lion Brand runs. So maybe if we can get that one up here. There we go. Oh, she made a bunch of hats. Great. It's another great use of some leftover yarn. If you made a sweater and you have a whole ball of yarn left, definitely use it for some hats, right?
Yes. Is the Hats Not Hate campaign, is blue the featured color for that?
Yes.
I kind of remember that. And I see a little bit of blue on top of that light colored hat. So the hat doesn't have to be all blue, but you want a little pop of blue at least. So it feels like part of the same project.
Yes. And the Hats Not Hate charity is, it's an anti-bullying campaign. So I think usually in October they hand out hats to schools as part of like an anti-bullying campaign, and the hats are sort of a reminder for everybody to be nice to each other. But hats, that's something that's just so great to make and donate. And there's so many places that you can donate hats. If, that's a great charity. If that one doesn't speak to you, there's tons of different places that you can donate hats to.
And what else can make someone feel so loved so easily than a warm hat? Here is a gift of warmth and care. I love it.
Yeah, me too. A few years ago, I was like, I wanted to collect some hats for a cancer center nearby, and just really kind of talked to some local knitters here, and there was the Stitches Midwest convention was in town. I actually got like over 700 hats, and I just like barely talking about it. It was kind of amazing. I had like huge boxes full of hats. So yeah, you can always find different charities for cancer patients, homeless shelters. There's lots of different places that will take hats happily.
I've I've knit for the Purple Hat Project,
Oh,
which
what's
is
that?
for preemie babies, and
Oh,
so they're tiny hats. They go pretty quickly. If you want to feel
yeah.
like you are super productive, purple hats.
Yeah, I'll
And
have
you
to
can
definitely check that
Google
one
that and
out.
find that online.
Yeah, that one's great too. Yeah, there's so many places where you can donate hats. It's so amazing. Okay, so we have a few questions now here in the chat. So I think we're going to go ahead and maybe start answering some of those. But yeah, again, that was so fun looking at some of those projects. And again, there's a link in the chat box now, I think, for our project gallery. If you are watching and you have a really great project you want to share, go ahead and upload it to our project gallery. Maybe we'll talk about it on the next live event. Okay, so now we have a question from it's either Lucia or Lucia. When you're doing a pattern, say like for a blanket, the question is, why do they give you different instructions for straight edge needles versus circular needles? So I think what this means is, why do, like for a blanket, for example, maybe why would they list a circular needle over a straight needle?
Well, anything that you can knit on a straight needle, you can knit on a circular needle.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Your blanket isn't necessarily going to be knit in the round, but with a circular needle, you can get a super long cable. So if all of your blanket is on the one needle, that needle can accommodate. Whereas, I don't think straight needles come longer than maybe 24 inches if you're getting a really super long one.
Mm-hmm.
The other really nice thing about circular needles is that it balances the weight of your project in your lap. And so you're not knitting along and there's all this weight at the end of a straight needle pulling down as you're trying to keep knitting as you go. So I knit with circular needles for pretty much everything. How about you?
Same. I knit with almost exclusively circular needles. And yeah, especially for something like a blanket, it's exactly what you said. It's that especially you might be able to cram your 200 stitches or however many stitches onto that straight needle. But just, yeah, think of the weight of knitting that you're going to have, especially as your blanket gets longer and longer and longer. I mean, like people all the time with knitting get like repetitive stress injuries, but I mean that's actually, yes, hello. But
I
that's
had that
actually,
last month.
yeah, yes, while you were working on your book, right? But yeah, I mean, like, I mean, it's like sounds like, oh, how could you hurt yourself knitting? But seriously, if you're trying to put a blanket on a straight needle and knit a 6 foot long blanket or something, you're going to really hurt your wrist by the end of that. That's no joke. So that's, I think, why designers will typically with blanket patterns tend to list using a circular needle over a straight needle, right? Is so
And sometimes,
you
even if you're
yourself.
making like modular squares for your blanket,
Mm-hmm.
you'll need a circular needle to go around the square because a square is
Mm-hmm.
really a circle with corners on it. But as you're
Mm-hmm.
knitting, you're just going around.
Yeah. Yeah. There's lots of reasons, yeah, that you would want to use a circular needle for sure. Um,
That's a
have
great
you,
question, though.
yeah, that
Oh,
is a
and
great question.
also, if you are not used to circular needles yet, don't buy an entire set until you know what you like. Because you might like metal needles better, or you might like bamboo needles better, or you might like ebony needles, or carbon fiber, or whatever. So get some, sample them, see if you like them. And for me, sometimes it depends on the kind of yarn I'm knitting with. Sometimes stitches won't slide very well on one kind of needle because of the yarn I'm using, but it's my favorite needle for everything else. So I have some stainless and some are pointier, some are not pointy. I have a lot of bamboo. I've got rosewood. It just depends on what I'm using it for. And then
Yeah.
if I like it, I'll buy a bunch of them. But that doesn't mean I'm never going to use the other thing because it just depends on what I'm knitting.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's a really great point is that at the beginning, especially when you're like first getting into the hobby or you're trying a new thing, like you're trying a circular needle for the first time, yeah, it might be your tendency to want to run out and buy all of them or buy a whole interchangeable set, right? An interchangeable set of circular needles is great, but it's important to spend a little time knowing exactly what you want to use maybe the most before you spend the money because some of those sets, whole sets, that they can add up price wise for sure. So,
Although, there's nothing wrong with having an arsenal of really good tools either. I've got
right,
an
I agree.
interchangeable set of regular points and pointy points, sharp
Hmm.
points in my stainless, and I use them both. It depends on what I'm knitting.
Right.
But, when you're first starting, go a little easy.
Right, exactly. Yes. And yeah, of course, as you're moving along in your journey in any hobby, yeah, you find yourself maybe wanting different tools or better tools and things like that. Or, yeah, I mean, I definitely have multiple interchangeable sets and it just depends on what I'm doing, what you want to use them for sure.
Or what doesn't have a project on it already and you need some needles and that's all you've got left.
Right. The number of like just plain old size 5 32-inch circular needles I have in this house is actually insane because that's typically what I'm knitting like a fingering weight shawl on. I'm a pretty loose knitter and that's like I know I want a size 5 for my shawl. Uh and there's a lot of those just around just so I
I,
always
I
can
have
have
the
like
rest of them that you don't have.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. We have bought them all.
That's it.
Yep, no more. Karen is wondering, oh, this is going to be a great question for you. I'm wondering how I can put a pretty edge on a straight edge, something like a crocheted scallop, but without crocheting it on. Do you have any patterns or tips for adding an edge to your knitting? A pretty
So
edging?
you're not looking for a plain edge, right? You're looking for something decorative.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe looking for something that has more of that scalloped look, but without actually crocheting. My suggestion would be I like to do knitted on edgings, or well, I usually call them knitted on borders. So I will knit whatever I'm making and then knit on a border actually perpendicular to my straight edge. And like you could increase and decrease to make a scallop. Um, or there's tons of great edgings out there that if you still have your stitches on the needle, you could just add it on or you could pick up and knit off the side as well.
So I'm going to ask you a question and then I'll go back to the original question.
Hmm.
But when you are designing something with a perpendicular border and added
Hmm.
on border at the end,
Hmm.
how do you budget your yarn? How do you know you're going to have enough? Or do you just figure, I'm going to design this and if it needs an extra skein, it needs an extra skein?
Okay, well, at the beginning when I did these knitted on borders, it was a disaster. And so I have this shawl in one of my books that is this huge half by shawl with a knitted on border. And I did not plan properly. And I had a friend who was, thank God it was a friend, a sample knitter, doing the sample, and the yarn just it was not enough yarn for this gigantic shawl. So what I tend to do now is I okay, so I can kind of estimate at the beginning, like I kind of know I've designed enough of these shawls that I kind of know how far I can go stitch wise to have enough for my border. But I will always double check it when I start the border, in that I will weigh the yarn, I will knit a couple repeats, and then I'll weigh it again. And then I already know how many repeats I'm going to have to do. So then I'll work the math out to make sure I have enough. Because then occasionally I will have to like rip back a repeat of the body of the shawl so that I'll have enough yarn. But
And you want to know that before you've knit the entire edging.
right, because the thing with those knitted on edgings where you're going perpendicular is like if you're just doing a plain old, well, I don't want to say plain old because there's lots of, beautiful stitches that you can put into your top down shawl. But if you're doing a top down shawl and you run out of yarn, you can usually kind of fudge it. You can add some stripes or find a similar color for the bind off and kind of get away with it. When you're doing a knitted on border, I mean, if you are 4 inches short, like you have this much more of your border to do and you run out of yarn, it's really obvious, unless you have more of that same yarn. So that's why I always double check when I'm starting it. I'll sort of weigh the yarn and then weigh it again and do the math just to make sure that my math is right. And I'm not going to, because knitting on borders take a long time too.
I know, and
Yeah,
a lot of yarn too.
a lot of yarn.
And I think as a designer, a yarn scale is your absolute best friend. So if you
Absolutely.
don't mind for just a second, I'm going to run back and grab a couple things, but let
Oh
me
yeah,
start
sure.
describing what I'm talking about first. If you are knitting a top-down shawl and you're getting down to that bottom edge and you want the bottom to wave or scallop or whatever,
Hmm.
you can use a lace pattern there. And it can't be just any lace pattern because some lace patterns will come out just straight, right? But a lace pattern where there is space between the yarn over and the decrease that goes with it that keeps those numbers the
Hmm.
same, those are the ones that are going to scallop.
Hmm.
And I have an example I can show you.
Oh yeah, let's see an example of this. Examples of scalloped edges are always welcome.
And that. And there's one other example. Oh, this would be a good example. I want the other color. Okay, we've got some ideas here.
Okay, great. Yeah, adding
This is
edgings to
the
your
cool
knitting
thing
is
about working
always
from
a good
home.
idea.
Everything is right there.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's great. Let's see
so
what you got.
this is, if you want to just pop that up, I can show you this bottom border here is
Oh yeah.
just old shale or feather and fan, and your increases are all together, and then your decreases are all together. And because the increase for each decrease is not right next to the other part of it, that's what makes it scallop like that. And I use this edge at the bottom of a lot of shawls because it's easy and it fits into a lot of the shawl math that I use. It's a multiple of 6, so I can use it in things that take 6 or 12 or 24 or 18. That all works. Um, this is an example of a knitted on edge, like Jen was talking about doing. And yes, I did weigh to make sure that there was going to be enough to make that happen. And then another really interesting construction, if you're not into terrifying math, is the side to side
Mm.
shawl. And this is when we were doing one skein shawls all the time. You could make these bigger. But this is all knit as a piece. And I'm going to show you the beginning. So hold it this way. You've got the body of the shawl and then the edging, and it's all knit back and forth. The edging doesn't go on after. So you just keep increasing in the body of the shawl. It's getting wider and wider in this garter stitch body. And your scale, again, is your friend. And you're going to knit till about half your yarn is gone, increasing that triangle. And then the other half of your ball goes into the decreasing. Or if you've got 2 skeins, you can use an entire one increasing and you can use an entire one decreasing. But that's a nice way to get a beautiful lacy border and not feel that math anxiety. I
Mm-hmm.
know designers have math anxiety.
Oh yeah, definitely do.
So I hope that answered your question a little bit, or maybe it was more than you were asking for, but there
Yeah.
we are. We get excited.
Oh yeah, Karen did say something like a feather and fan. So yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Something feather and fan would be perfect. We do have an article on the Knitting Circle website that has a feather and fan pattern in it, like just like the basics of like, it's a little bit it has more stitches than what Michele is talking about, but you can find lots um, of that feather and fan or old shale type stitch patterns. There's tons of variations from having like ones that are very small to ones that are very wide. And I think something like that would be perfect on the, well, it's like my favorite stitch basically. So I think it's perfect on everything for
I
sure.
think it is too. And here's one more hint about feather and fan or old shale. If you, in all of your knitting, are working with an even number, you can make that an even, a matched number of increases and decreases. But if you have a pattern where everything's based on an odd number, instead of that last increase and decrease, you would make a double decrease in the middle, and that would make things even out. as far as the stitch count, but it would be based on an odd number. So you can work your way around whatever it was that your knitting was before you got to that edge.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's awesome. Let's see. Going back to the Bedrunner, Karen was wondering if the knitter had created a pattern. I don't think so. She had not listed a pattern for the Bedrunner, so I think she just took whatever sweater pattern that she had and just adapted it to make that for herself. So I don't think there's an actual pattern, but I'm sure if you go online, I know that there are a lot of those types of patterns that you can find online. So I'm sure if you just do a Google search, you'd be able to find, find something similar that you would like. Let's see. Oh, Karen also says that her guild did the knit knockers for breast cancer survivors. So that's another great charity. They're just literally little knit knockers so people can, put them in their bra if they've had breast cancer. So that's another charity. That's a really great one. That one's very popular too. I
I
know.
once saw Kat Bordy at, I think it was at Madrona during the Teacher Talent Show, and there was all this talk about knitting the knit knockers. And she said, I didn't even have to knit this. And she took a ball of yarn and stuffed it in her bra.
That works too.
It does, but it doesn't wash as well.
Yeah, that's true. But the knit knockers I know that is a very popular charity.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could definitely find those online too. Let's see. What else do we have here? Oh, Barbara is suggesting a picot edge that would be perfect for edging, and specifically a picot edge is perfect for baby blankets. I do love a good picot edging. How about you, Michele?
I do, but I haven't used them very much. They're
Yeah.
a little bit fussy, the little back and forth, back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm going to put on an edge, I kind of like a little eyelet edge, although I don't want little baby
Mm-hmm.
fingers to get stuck in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You have
I
to
do like
choose
a
the size
picot
of your
edge.
eyelet or picot accordingly.
Yeah, I recently had somebody had asked a question on I don't remember if it was one of our videos on the Knitting Circle about using picot edging, specifically a folded picot like hem edging for
Yes.
like baby hat, like for the brim of a baby hat, and like if that would be something you could do. And I was like, absolutely, I think that would be so cute. I love doing even like the picot bind off or making little picots, but the picot hem I do where you fold it. That's a really nice technique. And we do have a video for that, of course, on the Knitting Circle if you're interested. Have you ever used the picot, like the folded picot for any
I
of
have
your
not.
designs?
I have not, but now you're making me think about it. So you know what happens when you make me start thinking about
Yeah.
things.
New design. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I knit. This was before I really was really deep into like the designing world, and I was more just just knitting other people's patterns or whatever. I did make a sock many years ago that had that folded picot edging, and like for the top of the sock. It was a very decorative fancy sock. It was pretty fun. I did like that one. um let's see.
And can you
Oh,
do that? You could do that at the beginning or at the end of the sock, right?
yeah, I
If
mean,
you
yes,
top
I
down, either toe up or cuff
yes.
down.
Yeah, because I think if you're going to go top down, it's actually very easy because then when you fold your hem, you can sort of just knit your starting edge, sort of pick it up and knit it in to your stitches. Where if you went toe up, you might have to stitch it down at the end.
See, now I'm making you think a little bit.
So top down.
I put a rolled, was it garter or stockinette edge on the top of a sock where you've got your cast on and then you
Mhm.
start knitting. And I don't remember if you work a couple rows first, but then as you're knitting, you'll knit 5 stitches and then put a twist in it and knit 5 stitches and put a twist in
Oh,
it.
yes,
And
yes.
then you join it in the round and then you can make your sock. But you can't do that toe up because you can't put a twist in your knitting when you've
Hmm.
got the entire sock underneath. So that's why I
Yeah.
was asking you about the picot. Can you do that either way you knit a sock, or are you stuck with one way only?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could technically do it toe up. It's just that when you get to the end, you're still going to need to fold it down and then just like kind of whip stitch it around, I
And then you
think.
have to sew, and we're really here for the knitting, aren't we?
We're really here for the knitting. Yes, I agree. Let's see. Oh, Karen's saying she did a bobble edge for a shawl once. I did a sideways shawl where I put bobbles along the edge, like that was kind of fun to do. Bobbles are heavy. Do you use, like, I know you like specialty stitches, Michelle,
I
right?
do, but not bobbles.
But not bobbles.
I because, well, if you're knitting a bobble, you knit some and you turn it around and you knit and you turn it around. And that doesn't bother me because I can knit backwards. Do I have a video for knitting backwards on your? I don't remember if I do or not.
You do not, but somebody else does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that makes bobbles a lot easier. But to me, bobbles are just fussier than I want to do. I just want to go.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. Like these little bobbles that I did on the edge of the shawl, like they were a little less complicated because they were like right along the edge. I don't remember exactly now how exactly I made them along the edge. It was many years ago, but yeah, I do love the way the bobbles look, but I mean, I'm somebody who just wants to like knit garter stitch and feather and fan all the time. Those are like, so going for a bobble in the middle of my project, I'm probably pretty unlikely to do that.
And I'm never sure where the bobble's going to land and, if it's going to look good in the place where it lands.
But that's part of what I'm always talking about. That's what I love about knitting, but it's true. It's like everybody can just like different things or prefer different things. And yeah, you just got to knit what makes you happy, right?
Yeah, and just try new things. And if you don't like it, move on. Nobody says you have to be able to do this kind of stitch or that kind of stitch, or you have to do stranded color work. No.
Right.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to that first hat we looked at with the blue and white checks.
Oh, yes. The blue and white checks. Yes, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a slip stitch pattern that you can do that would do the same. And it would look the same from the front. It wouldn't look the same from the back, but just saying, if you wanted to just use one color only at a time, that might be a way to take care of that little problem too.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Let's see.
Also, blocking. When you're done with it, you want to make sure you give it a bath, because most stranded color work looks a little bit wonky. When it comes off your needles, it's going to look puckery and whatever. And if you steam block it, it'll help a little. But I find with stranded color work, wet blocking is fabulous. When you wet block, and even to a point when you steam block, but mostly when you wet block, you are giving the yarn a chance to kind of even itself out. And so your stitches even out, because all your stitches want to be average. They want to be the same size. And they're not when it comes off your needles, because, you're pulling and doing things there. So it gives your stitches a chance to become average, and also for your stitches to set itself into fabric. So, if you've ever had to ravel something, like I'm doing right now, and you've washed it before, your yarn is going to look like kinky ramen. And that's because this yarn has set itself into fabric, as opposed to being just a series of stitches. That's what your blocking is going to do for you. Even now, when I'm binding off on the edge of this shawl, again, I don't know if you can see this, if I can get close enough, but my bind off, oh, there's my camera up there. My bind off edge looks kind of bumpy and wonky, and it's because the yarn is kinky. But when I either next wet block this, which I really don't feel like because I just did it a couple of weeks ago, I'm going to try steaming it first to see if it makes all those kinked up edges smooth out. I've been trying to, pull on the yarn a little bit to make them sit where I want them to, but it's really set up to be something else right now. So I think blocking it is just going to smooth it out again.
Yeah. That's great. Blocking is very important.
I love blocking. I'm a blocking evangelist.
Yes, you are. And yeah, if you need to know about blocking, particularly blocking shawls, for sure, definitely check out Michelle's video on the Knitting Circle, where she will show you how to block a shawl. Okay, so we have one last question here, which actually sort of leads into the last thing I was going to ask you. So Vicky would like to know, what is the name of the beautiful turquoise side-to-side shawl that you had shown? I think you just, that one, I believe. Yes, I believe that one. She would like to know the name of it.
This is called Garland, and I have it on Ravelry and PayHip. I'm
Okay.
PDX Knitterati, and it is set up so that you can either make it kind of this shape, or if you increase less often, and it's set up for that too, you get a longer, skinnier version so that you can wrap twice. So lots of options in there.
All right, so there you go. And then I was going to ask you, just because we are coming to the end of our time, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you online, where they can find your designs like that one, and yeah, and if you can tell us a little bit about your book that's going to be coming
I
out
can't
soon.
tell you much about my book yet,
Okay.
other than it's coming out, I hope, in October.
Okay. Yay.
Still kind of under wraps, so we're just being very secretive about the whole thing, but I'm very excited about it. It is a teaching kind of book with a particular technique. There are 21 patterns in it,
Ooh.
and I think you'll like them. So it starts out really easy, and then it just teaches you another skill and another skill and another skill. And at the end, we put it all together. And one of my favorite things ever that I've ever designed is in there in that last chapter. And I
Ooh.
can't wait to share it with you.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
so
Well,
I'm
yeah. So where can everybody find you so they can keep up to date on when this book is coming out and grab one of your patterns if they want to?
I'm PDX Knitterati, and if you look on the little square where I am, is my name on there? No, it just says Michele Bernstein. So it's PDX, which is the Portland, Oregon airport code, and then Knitterati.com, and I'm PDX Knitterati pretty much everywhere. So I'm on Instagram and Ravelry and Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, but don't go to Twitter. It's just a pit of negativity.
I deleted
And
my Twitter a few years ago. So
yes. And so you can find my patterns on Ravelry and on PayHip. Not all of them are on PayHip yet. It takes a while to
Mhm.
set up 100 patterns on PayHip, but all my shawls are there at this point.
Great.
And then new things as I go and things that I need reference to, I'm getting up there slowly. But I've been a little bit busy working on my book the last few months. And so it just, everything takes a little time. But if
Yeah.
you look on my website, pdxknitterati.com, which is where my blog is, you can sign up for my mailing list. And you can also see all of my patterns. They're listed there, and it'll tell you where to find them.
Great. Well, thank you so
Thanks.
much for joining us today, Michelle. It was really great to have you. I had a lot of fun looking through those photos on the project gallery. So I'm sure that's something we will continue to do in some of these live events going forward.
Yeah, I
And then
really love looking through those projects too. It
yeah.
was really fun to see what people are doing.
Yeah, me too. I just love seeing what people are doing with the craft that we love so much, you know. And just a reminder to everybody out there watching, if you haven't already, be sure to download the free pattern for this month, which is the Chunky Broken Rib Cowl. And that's all we have for today. So be sure to follow us on Facebook, check us out on YouTube, and we'll see you next month for another live. Bye, everyone.
Bye.